Hi, dear friends. I'm doing something new today. I don't think I've ever posted a video like this on Facebook before, but I was on the phone with my friend Chase, and I realized while we were talking that today is the 20th anniversary of my relationship with Ethiopia. 20 years ago, I left Ethiopia after 2 months living and working in Addis and returned home. And 20 years ago, I didn't know that I was leaving home to come home, but Ethiopia had become my second home that summer, and the Ethiopian people had become my family in a way that I didn't fully understand at that time. And for the last 20 years, I have had the sacred gift of becoming part of the Ethiopian family and becoming a friend of so many Ethiopian people. I've also become an enemy of so many Ethiopian people, though that was never my desire or intention. Through the years, I have been blessed to be a pastor in Ethiopia. Started off just as a student, came as a 21-year-old kid, worked at the Mercy Center in Woloseffer, worked with women and kids and youth on English and food aid and clothing and soccer, singing. During that summer, I was invited to teach at the Addis Ababa Bible College and had the great privilege and pleasure of learning with Ethiopian pastors and faith leaders about the meaning of following Jesus and being part of God's desire for love and healing in our world. And that experience just so profoundly changed my life. It was this extraordinary intersection of my deepest loves: human culture, ancient history, service, coming into a closer intimacy with human suffering, confronting human violence, ancient and emerging faith, and the endlessly rich gift of becoming friends. When I traveled to Ethiopia, I didn't know anything about Ethiopia. I didn't know any of Ethiopia's amazing languages. I didn't know who was picking me up from the airport. I didn't know where I was staying in the city. I didn't know exactly what I would be doing. I really didn't know much of anything. And that experience of entering into radical ignorance, radical unknowing, radical newness, radical discovery was absolutely life-changing. And today I feel such a deep sense of joy and a deep sense of sobriety when anyone tells me that they're about to go on a journey that's going to take them into that kind of fundamental newness, ignorance, helplessness, unknowing. Because I know that that changes your life and that makes you into a different kind of person if you're willing to listen, to learn, to pay attention, to be present, to make friends with strangers and to allow them to become your family, to allow their home to become your home. I wish that every human being could have that experience of going to a place where you don't know the languages, you don't know the histories, you don't know the cultures, you don't know the food, you don't know the jokes, you don't know the wars, you don't know the hidden griefs and the histories of trauma. You don't know the brilliance and the beauty and the belovedness of that place and its peoples, and then you just live and you fall in love and you suffer and you change and you become human. When I think about that experience of going to Ethiopia for the first time, I'm so deeply moved when I remember my very first memory when I stepped foot in Ethiopia. I passed through immigration, and then I stepped out of the baggage claim in Bole International Airport, and there was a woman who was writhing on the floor. She was shrieking and crying. She was grieving, and I'm guessing that one of her loved ones must have died. And there was just that image of raw, uncensored pain right there in the airport. And then I was greeted by a kind man named Haile. I'll never forget Haile. He had the warmest face. He had the kindest smile. Haile loved to laugh. He was the first person that ever called me Andaru. And he welcomed me, and he drove me down Bole Road. It was a very different road at that time. It's fundamentally changed over the last 20 years, and he took me left onto Ethio-China Friendship Road into Woloseffer. And that began my Ethiopian pilgrimage. And when I think again about those kinds of experiences of entering into such radical newness, I really think that it's birth and dying. So much of what is familiar, of what is comfortable, of what is taken for granted comes to an end, and it dies, and so much inside of you dies. But there is a new birth that comes, this dearest freshness out of the womb. That darkness, that trauma, that splitting of being born into a new world with new people and really finding out what it means to be human and to become human together. Looking back, I think that's the first time that I began experiencing that birth and death are somehow the same thing. And that when we begin to die, we begin to be born. And when we are born, we begin to die. And this process of birthing and dying, of coming and going, of losing and finding, this is what it means to become human. Yeah, in the early stage of my relationship with Ethiopia, I simply fell in love with Ethiopia. I fell in love with the kindness of Ethiopian people, the intelligence, the resilience, the generosity. I'll never forget going to Lalibela in Gondar 20 years ago and being totally blown away by the richness of Ethiopian architecture, icons, and the people who made those historic places and call those places home. I'll never forget that I left my journal in Gondar, and that journal was really, really important to me. It was filled with my notes from that experience, but I left it there. And somehow we got in touch with the people of Gondar. And someone got on a bus and brought that journal to Addis Ababa and handed it to me. It was such an amazing act of kindness, of generosity, of hospitality, of sacrifice. I've experienced that again and again and again with Ethiopian people. I'll never forget being on Mount Nagasha outside of Addis Ababa and walking by myself through this field past a mud hut, Gojo Bates. A woman stepped through her door and said, "Na, Geba, Bunat Etta, come in, drink coffee." It touched me to my core. It almost makes me cry right now. Because I was a total stranger. She didn't know who I was. And yet she invited me to come into her home and to drink with her, spend time with her. My goodness. I fell in love with Ethiopia and I started learning, reading, studying, traveling. Throughout the last 20 years, I've been to the northernmost tip of Ethiopia, in Tigray. Seen the genius, the ancient pride, the enduring civilization of Tigray and Aksum, Adwa, Debra, some of the most ancient monasteries in the Christian tradition in the mountains of Tigray. I've looked over the border to Eritrea, that blood-soaked border, that war zone. I've been all throughout Amhara. Love the Amhara people so much. The genius, the dignity, the rugged resilience of Amhara folks. That was my first journey outside of Addis Ababa, Lalibela, Gondar. Since then I've been to Lalibela 9 times. It's my Jerusalem. For me, I've been to Jerusalem, I've been to the Wailing Wall, I've been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but for me, Lalibela it's something else. The sacredness, the places of worship dug into the ancient mountain. This earth as a place of sacredness, a place of communion, a place where the presence of God lives. Amazing. I've been to the east. I've been to Harar. I've been to Dredwa. I've been to the ancient mosques and the markets. I've seen the signature energy, boldness, hilarity, brilliance of Hararis and Somalis and Afaris. I'll never forget walking the streets of Harar. And I had heard of the hospitality, and I wanted to try it out for myself, so I literally knocked on a random gate. I was just curious what would happen. I knocked on that gate, and a woman came to the door. And of course, she invited me in. She offered me food and tea, and she took me to her husband, who was having his afternoon chat. And I sat there for a couple hours with Abdi, and we talked. And I asked him, what do you love about Allah? And he told me that he loved that Allah was just, that he saw all people as equal. And when I walked away from Abdi and his family's home that day, I felt that justice, that equality, that mutual dignity that had welcomed me, again, as a total stranger into a family's home, and made me feel like I belonged there, and made me feel so at home and alive. I've been to southern Ethiopia, all over the place. You know, in the Ethiopian community, it's a real danger to name specific names. I've said Tigrayans, Amharas, Afaris, Somalis, Hararis. There's too many beautiful, brilliant people, and you always leave someone out. But I've been with the Walaitas and the Sidamas and so many different people, and the beauty of the South, the massive fields, the ancient trees, the extraordinary hospitality, the dancing, the singing, the insane hard liquor. Whew, I'll never forget dancing around the fire that night as we sang and we rejoiced. And then going inside the Gojo Beit, the hut, and us all sitting around the perimeter of that circular home, and people telling stories, and the elders speaking blessings. And the elders blessed me to be married, and that one was fulfilled with the most beautiful woman in Ethiopia, Lily, many years later. My diamond, my gift, my righteous prize. They blessed me with kids. That one hasn't come yet. They blessed me with cars and houses and wealth. Those things haven't come yet either. But man, I experienced incredible kindness and generosity and care there, all throughout the south of Ethiopia. I've been to the east, but not enough. Not enough. I have so much more to discover in the east with our dear sisters and brothers, and I've been all throughout Oromia. So many memories with amazing Oromo intellectuals, journalists, historians, singers. Meeting Hach Alu was a really precious gift. I'll never forget the kindness of his presence, the gentleness with which he spoke, and his sense of prophetic determination to speak for justice in the face of oppression torture, killing. So many dear Oromo sisters and brothers. I love all of the 80 plus peoples of Ethiopia. I've been privileged to meet a few of them. Been privileged to spend time in the homes of a few of them. Ethiopia is like a infinite diamond. There's so much more to encounter, to discover, to appreciate and cherish. I'm a beginner. You know, I kind of grew up in Ethiopia. I went there for the first time when I was 21 years old, and in a lot of ways I became an adult in Ethiopia. You know, James Baldwin said that those who can't suffer will never grow up. And in the same way that I fell in love with Ethiopia and was totally enchanted by the beauty and the brilliance and the life and the goodness of Ethiopian people and Ethiopian places, I also suffered in Ethiopia. It's not the same as the suffering of Ethiopian people, but suffering isn't meant to be compared. Our suffering is our suffering, and we can learn to grieve it and to accept it and to share it. You know, that first time that I was in Ethiopia, I'll never forget seeing a man with polio who used a shred of tire and flip-flops on his hands to drag himself through the streets. It cut me to my core to see this image bearer of God humiliated and dragging himself through the dusty streets by himself. God bless him. I'll never forget meeting the street children of Ethiopia. I've probably talked to hundreds, if not thousands of them now. Dear Woodday, dear Eob, dear Chala, I'll never forget walking from my house in Bisrat Gabriel to Mexico and then to Stadium. And I saw this small child laying in the middle of the street, heading down the hill from Mexico to Stadium. She was covered in dust and cars were racing past her. If she just rolled over, she would have fallen into the street and been run over. And it killed me that this child was there, lying on cement in dust, beside racing cars. There was probably hundreds of people walking by. But none of us did anything, and she just laid there. I don't know if she's dead or alive now. God bless her. My sister. Our sister. And then meeting Eob that day, May 1st, 2010, Beitana, in Sarabate. Eob came and asked for help. We said no, turned around, his hood fell off, and I saw that he had this horrific wound on the back of his head. And I started warring in my soul. Do I finish my lunch? Or do I go talk to this kid? And I heard Jesus speak to me that day. And Jesus said to me, Andrew, if you say no to him, you've said no to me. And I got up from that table and I chased after Yub. And there he was. I could see his brain pulsing through his wound, blood, pus, bone. And Yub changed my life. That dear boy, that dear brother, he was full of hope. He was full of gift. He was full of brilliance. He was full of generosity. I call him my saint of darkness. I love you, Yub. I know that you're safe. I know that you're home with Madani Alam. I was a pastor and then I became a professor, and I worked with many brilliant students. I'm grateful for all of them. Sarah, Gelata, Sammy, Minda Ye. You know who you are. Thanks for working with this controversial Ferenc. But I taught a lot of night classes and I talked to a lot of prostitutes. Streets. So many women after night, after dark. Just ask them their name, where they're from, what their story is. And I love those women. Never touched them. But I love them. It's always killed me to see the prostitution in Ethiopia, the desperation, the joblessness that drives people to sell their bodies to lustful, greedy men to try to stay alive. I don't blame any of the commercial sex workers of Ethiopia. I know that Jesus is with them in their struggle and in their suffering. And then violence. You know, I'll never forget the second time I lived in Ethiopia. I arrived in 2005 after the federal election. A few days later, I heard the crackle of machine gun fire throughout the city. And I knew that people were being killed. And they were. 200 people at least were killed that day by the police in the streets of Addis Ababa. The body politic was dismembered, torn apart in the most brutal way. That was a decisive turning point in Ethiopian modern history. I'll never forget the city being like a ghost town, the streets empty. And then when I would talk to shopkeepers or taxi drivers or random people about what happened, everyone would whisper. You know, that's when I started learning about the psychology of oppression. You're in a taxi cab by yourself and you whisper because you've been so conditioned to fear that the government is listening. Some Jorot Evi, some ear sucker, as the saying goes in Amharic, is listening, ready to report you. Of course, that comes from the trauma of Aishibir, the Red Terror. So many people were reported, family members reporting on one another, neighbors reporting on one another, colleagues reporting on one another, and then people disappeared. They went to jail. They got shot in the streets. Mothers had to pay for the bullets that killed their children on their doorstep. The psychology of oppression, the psychology of authoritarianism, the psychology of violence creates an inner world of fear, censorship, numbness, rage. You can read about it, but you don't really know what it is until you've experienced it for yourself. I think of Zone 9, my friend Befekadu, and how he said that there are 8 zones in Ethiopia's infamous prison, and that all of Ethiopia is Zone 9. Everyone living in an open-air prison. Of course, that's a dark interpretation of Ethiopia. As I said, there's so much beauty, goodness, brilliance, freedom, joy, safety, so much to celebrate, so much dignity. But man, the Ethiopian people live inside the consciousness of that oppression after decades and centuries of violence. And so I had to resign from being a professor. That man got lynched in Shashamani. That man got burned alive in Hawassa. People got displaced in Gedio and Guji. And I knew that I couldn't be a professor of public theology and Christian ethics in a safe evangelical island. And so I submitted my resignation letter, and Lily and I and Tekalen Fitsum, we started the Neighbor Love movement. 2018, 2019. And our message was and is simple. The other is not our enemy. The other is our neighbor. Each person is a precious diamond, full of worth, dignity, the divine. And that's why a diamond is our logo, and around that diamond are spokes like a compass. We wanted to communicate that when we can see the precious worth of the other like a diamond, that's when we get our compass. That's when we know how to live and where to go and what to do. So we wrote a covenant. Today I covenant to love my neighbor as myself. Every woman, man, and child is my neighbor. I choose to value and respect my neighbor across every boundary with compassion. Today I say yes, I'm an ambassador of neighbor love. And we designed 7 practices of neighbor love. The eyes, how we see the other. The mouth, how we speak to one another. The ears, do we listen with patience to understand. The hands, we reach out to help rather than to harm. The heart, we allow the joy of the other and the pain of the other to live inside of us. Our feet, we choose to move closer to people who are different than us. Our brains, we choose to live an integrated life where our beliefs and our behavior match one another. We traveled the whole country as much as we could. Before we knew it, 20 million people had heard our message. And we invited so many to sign our covenant. Thousands signed it. Street kids, moms and dads, students, professors, Gideon Timotheos, Attorney General of Ethiopia. That got complicated. Jawar Mohammed. Skinder Nega. Ooh, I could mention many names. It all got complicated. It's not easy living a covenant life. It's not easy practicing neighbor love with the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the hands, the feet, the heart, the mind. And then the death threats started. They started so ironically. They started on Good Friday in Meskel Adababai, 2020. Good Friday in Cross Square. People said that I was working to destroy the Ethiopian government, that I was hell-bent on closing and dividing Ethiopian churches. I learned a lesson. It's changed my life. When you love the enemy, you become the enemy. If you love across ethnic lines, across religious lines, across political lines, people get confused. So many of us have built our identities on othering. By othering, I mean seeing other people as unrelated or less than ourselves. And so when those lines start getting crossed, we start feeling confused and threatened and at risk. And the person who crosses those lines, who blurs those lines, we see them as an enemy who is threatening our identity, our belonging, our safety. Before we know it, we start telling those people that they're terrorists, that they're demons, that they're hyenas, that they're pedophiles, that they're evil people. I've gotten over 50 pages of death threats from my beloved Ethiopian sisters and brothers. People have made so-called documentaries about me, taking pictures from my Facebook page with my friends and family and street kids, and they've strung those together into this ridiculous narrative that I'm CIA or an Egyptian spy or an insurrectionist getting paid millions of dollars to harm Ethiopia. God bless them all. Sayum, God bless you, brother. Zemed Kun, God bless you, brother. I know you. It's okay. So many. Probably the most painful part was that friends said that I should be deported, that I should be imprisoned. You know, an Ethiopian theologian who signed the Neighbor Love Covenant, he wrote an article saying that I take pleasure in Ethiopian suffering. Bekele, that was one of the lowest lows. It was sick. But it's okay. You're still my brother. You're still my neighbor. Desta, you told me to make a public apology to all Ethiopians for the cause that I had done by opposing the Civil War. I have so much to apologize for, but not for opposing the war. The war was a horrific evil. It killed 1.2 million people maybe, displaced 5 million people from their homes, and made 20 million people hunger. I'm shameless. in opposing violence in Ethiopia, Chicago, America, and Russia, and Ukraine, and Gaza, and Israel, across the earth. I have no apologies for opposing war and the devastation of the image of God in others. But God bless you, brother. Grateful you're alive. I'm grateful I know you. Yeah. Baldwin. Those who suffer can't grow up. Birth and death are the same thing. Coming and going. Losing and finding everything. Today, 20 years later, after I completed my first journey in Ethiopia, I want to say something so deep from my heart. So many children have suffered in the Civil War. So many women have been raped and murdered. So many men slaughtered, burned alive, buried in mass graves, left to float in rivers, eaten by dogs and hyenas. It's hell. But I believe that every one of those people is okay. In Ethiopia, I discovered that God is love, and that love heals all, and that all will be well. I believe that God is in the dust with those bodies, that God is in the water with those drowned bodies, that God is so close to those raped women, that God weeps with those who weep, that God embraces those shaking with terror. That God sits beside the one who can't even cry because the pain is just too extreme. The ones who commit suicide, the ones who feel total despair because they can't see a future. Jesus, the crucified Christ, he is the friend of the suffering, the great companion, the comforter of the grieving. And so my heart is broken for the street children and the women working in the streets and those who were murdered and displaced and starved in the war. Nothing can ever make that suffering right. But I believe that God is with all who suffer, and that love holds them, and that God can heal all, Madani Alam, healer of the world, the all-compassionate, the all-merciful one. And so I'm learning that death is nothing to fear. Somehow, death is gentle. Death is trustworthy. And to die, in the end at least, is like stepping through a door or changing clothes or switching on a light. Death takes us home. to our Creator, to our Savior, to our Resurrector. Death, that mysterious portal to the place where there is no more tears, no more violence, no more raping, insulting, killing, burning, displacing. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, Jesus said. Blessed are the grieving, they will be comforted. Blessed are the non-violent, they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the hungry and thirsty for justice, they will be fed. Blessed are the compassionate, they will be mirrored with compassion. Blessed are the clean-hearted, they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, they will be called the children of God. Blessed are the persecuted for the sake of justice, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. This is Jesus' gospel. This is his prophetic good news. Oh, and it's so different than our religion. We have our crosses, we have our icons, we have our songs and dances, we have our churches and monasteries and mosques. And we have so much to learn there. There's so much goodness in all of it. But this gospel of Jesus, this beatitudinal way, we're still only beginning to discover it. Even through genocide, through war, through death. And so, I confess, I've never said this to anyone but Lily and Tekalen and a few of my closest friends, but I will open my heart to you today on my 20th anniversary. There have been times that I asked God, why Ethiopia had to be such an open wound of pain and such a place of extreme suffering. I felt embarrassed to say that. I felt ashamed. It felt disrespectful. But I felt that sometimes. But there have been so many other times where I felt like Ethiopia was heaven on earth. The food, the song, the dance, the kindness, the spirited dialogue, the brilliant minds, the mind-blowing resilience, strength, endurance, perseverance, determination, the endless pride, the defiant dignity, the wild diversity, over 80 languages, so many styles and expressions of the human condition. Endless. It's the image of God. I believe God is infinite, and so the image of God is infinite. We can't exhaust it or reach its end. And I've seen that in Ethiopia. I've seen that in Eob. I've seen that in Woodday, Aden, Brukti, Hale, Yoni, Ermi, Beatty, Mule, Mercy, Jawar, Skinder, Gideon, Chala, Muhammad, Itash, Tilahun, Al-Azhar, scale, tzarala, ma'aza, fasika, takalin, tahitana, Sarah. I could go on and on. All fractals in the infinite face of God, all carats in the diamond of the image of God, all beams of light from that infinite sun. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful for Ethiopia. I'm grateful for this journey of 20 years. I'm grateful to have died and to have been born again, to have gotten lost and found, to have ended and begun again. Grateful for that woman writhing on the floor at Bole International Airport in Haile in his lion-like face of kindness and warmth. Most of all, I'm grateful for Lily, my beloved wife of 14 years, relationship for 17 years, her beloved family who became my family, her sisters who became my sister, her brother who became my brother, her dad who became my dad, her mom who became my mom, even though I've never met her because she died when Lily was 8. Another one of the heart-shattering traumas of Ethiopia. Maternal mortality. Isaias, my brother. Lily for me is the diamond in the crown of Ethiopia. Her gentleness, her kindness, her peacefulness. Lily taught me nonviolence. Lily taught me peace. Lily taught me that being a kind, peaceful person is not weak. Ooh, it requires courage, strength, power. Lily taught me that God is love, that God is gentle, that God is omni-gentle, omni-patient, omni-kind. So there's no violence in God at all. God doesn't need it. God doesn't need to be violent to achieve God's will. God will accompany and abide and endure. But there's no violence in God. Learn that from Lily. Learned what suffering means from Lily. I've seen her tears. I've learned what joy means from Lily. Her laughter is magic. The light in her eyes, it won me over the very first time I met her. It's still there. It's still infinite. I've just begun to explore where it comes from. I've learned about beauty from Lily. The beauty of her eyes and her body, the beauty of her soul, the beauty of her art. Lily is a dazzling painter. The paintings that came out of that woman's soul blow me away. They heal my heart. They cleanse my eyes. They show me what the great welcome really means. Love you, baby. Thanks for making my family your family and your family my family. Thanks for making my home your home and your home my home. Thanks for showing me that we're not others or enemies. We're neighbors and siblings, all of us, no matter what, whether we want it or not. We are we. Stop talking about Lily in public because it became too dangerous. All the threats, stop posting her picture. But she's at the center of my heart when I think about Ethiopia and talk about Ethiopia and love Ethiopia. I want to say something clearly. I'm a white American from Chicago, not a messiah, not a savior, certainly not a wealthy person, although I'm super rich with love. I'm just an ordinary person. I don't have any ambitions of fixing Ethiopia, changing Ethiopia, saving Ethiopia. I'm just grateful to be part of the family. All families are complicated. The wider Ethiopian family is extremely complicated. Grateful to be part of the family. Thank you for welcoming me. And I want to say to everyone who's ever sent me a death threat, everyone who's ever left a hateful message on my Facebook or Twitter, YouTube, everyone who has ever assassinated my character, you got something right. I'm an imperfect person. I make mistakes, lots of them. I know that really well. But I don't believe in violence, and I don't believe in hate, and I don't believe in killing people. I just want to say that all those folks who felt like you needed to label me and hate me and try to think about killing me, I still see you as my neighbors. I still see you as family. I still see you as fellow human beings made in the infinite image of God. You're still diamonds. And I am too. I'm grateful we've crossed paths. And I hope that you will experience peace and joy, flourishing, fullness, happiness, and hope. I don't wish you any harm. I don't wish you any suffering. Maybe I'll say something to Prime Minister Abiy. A lot of people love you, a lot of people hate you. You're a complex person with a lot of good and a lot of evil. It's in me too. You're not alone. You've done so much for Ethiopia that has been worthy of respect and appreciation, and for that I thank you. You've done so much in Ethiopia that has been devastating, destructive, full of death, genocidal. I think there's still hope for you, my brother, just like I think there's hope for me and for all of us. It depends on facing what we've done and giving thanks for the good and repenting for the evil. I pray for you a lot, dear brother Abiy, Abiot. I hope that you can still face yourself, not the flattery, the self-congratulation, the Messiah complex. I hope that you can face yourself as another human child of God and admit your mistakes and confess your sins and ask for forgiveness. We can always begin again. When we die, we're born. But the attention in Ethiopia so often goes to the Tilik Soch, the big people, and I tonight want to end this message by just expressing my deep love for everyday, ordinary Ethiopians, the folks who've given me kolo, uha, injera, wet, sam, sak, fikr, emnet, tesfa, tensai, Xavier. Jesus. Thanks for feeding me your food and pouring me your buna and welcoming me into your homes and walking with me on your streets. You changed my life. There's been times that I thought you'd kill me. There's been times that you've made me feel like I'll never die. There's been times where I've felt with you like everything's coming to an end. And there's been times with you when I felt like everything was starting over. There's been times with you when I felt like the suffering, the pain, the meaninglessness, the absurdity, the despair, the hate, the violence could never come to an end. And there's been so many times with you when I felt like the joy, the laughter, the trust, the admiration, the affection, the happiness, the goodness, the blessing never come to an end. And I choose to trust the latter. Goodness is immortal. Happiness is eternal. Love never ends, never fails. Hopes all things. Trusts. It's unbreakable. Fikr eskamakabir. And then beyond. So, thank you for your friendship. Thanks for welcoming me into the community 20 years ago. I can hardly believe it. It feels like yesterday and it feels like 10 lifetimes ago. If you're watching this and you were alive then, maybe you feel like it's been 20 lifetimes ago. Part of me's shocked we're still alive. But man, I love Ethiopia. There's been times when I wanted to cut that love out of my soul. Times when I wanted a divorce from the Ethiopian family. Been times when you wanted a divorce from me too. But I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for it all, every bit of it. And I love Ethiopia. I don't know what my future is in relationship to that beloved land. Can't really go there right now. Probably not safe. Too many people still believe the conspiracies about me. That's okay. But I think that my future probably is still bound together with Ethiopia. More importantly, with Ethiopian people, and I I feel hopeful. I feel trustful. And I feel love. Please receive all my thanks if you've ever shared a meal with me or shared a conversation with me or heard me talk or talked to me or welcomed me into your home or given me a hug to see me passing in the street or in a minibus. Know that I'm grateful for you. I think that you are amazing. So glad that our paths crossed. I could talk about Ethiopia forever. The love's that deep, the pain's that deep. The affection and the admiration is that deep. But this is already too long. Maybe I'm becoming like an Ethiopian elder. I have a lot to say. Love you all, and special thanks to my friends. You know who you are. Become my family. Nefs Nachu. Become my soul. I'm so glad that happened. Some of you have died. Hear me. Yep. Can't tell you how many tears I wept for you, missing you. Some of you are still alive and having babies and doing work, and you're brilliant intellectuals and you're creative business people and you're loving ministers of God and you're writers, your friends. Some of you are addicts. Some of you have a lot of pain. I do too. I'm just so grateful for all of you, and I'm so proud to call you my friends and to call myself your friends, your friend. Thank you. Who knows what the future holds? Maybe another 20 years? Be 61 then. Maybe it all ends tomorrow. God only knows. But for now, my word is gratitude. Amaseganado. Xavier Stillen. Thank you for welcoming me into your space, your community. Thank you for teaching me that we can die and be born again. We can end and begin again. We can get lost and be found. And somehow, death and birth are the same thing. And the time when we think it's all over is really when it all begins. My prayer is for God to embrace each one with mercy, kindness, gentleness, comfort, laughter, dignity, the capacity to hope even when it feels like all hope is gone. Whether that happens today or tomorrow, or in the afterlife, I believe that's God's promise for all of us. As Eob said to me, Xavier Kananta Gayuhun.